Good morning, everyone. Today I'm speaking about something that all of us should be able to relate to. Kingdom interruptions. She grew up in a country which placed many restrictions on women. Head coverings were mandatory outside of the home or if non-family men were visiting. Education for women was restricted. However, after the Taliban were driven out, she was afforded the opportunity to go to a Canadian university within her country. Inside in its confines, there was freedom, laughter, the ability to share ideas with others. Hope stirred in her heart that there might be a brighter future for her country. She dreamed of getting a master's degree overseas and then returning home to be part of her country's future. That all changed when the coalition forces began to withdraw and the Taliban started reclaiming control, one province after another, Kandahar, Herat, Helmand, etc., until only Kabul was left. Many of us saw the pictures as crowds of people crushed forward around the Hamid Karzai International Airport, where the evacuations were happening. Some families even tried to pass their children across the fences to the soldiers to guarantee their future safety. She was one of that crowd, and herself, her mother, and some younger siblings made it out on the last plane, but had to leave other family members behind, including her father, who tragically lost his life to the Taliban. And now she comes to Faith Fellowship Baptist Church. We all face interruptions in our lives, whether they are the minor, the phone call arriving at the inconvenient time, heading out the door to find a flat tire or a late bus, or to the more significant like a car accident or a broken bone or losing a job. Then, as we have heard, there are life-altering interruptions, like a cancer diagnosis, financial ruin, the death of a family member or close friend, war, or forced displacement. Friday was International Refugee Day. As of the end of April 2025, there are 122.1 million forcibly displaced globally, refugees, internally displaced people, and asylum seekers. Refugees are not just numbers. They are people who have faces, names, and stories. Quote by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. This one struck me. No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. Warsan Shiri. Our church is home to many who have had their lives interrupted by various circumstances and made the decision to request a new start in Canada. Our scripture today presents 3 responses to life interruptions, from minor to life-changing. Let's read the full passage now from Matthew 15:21-28. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman, or in some versions it says a Syrophoenician woman, from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." Jesus answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. This passage can cause all sorts of questions. And I want to give some context first before I unpack. Tyre and Sidon were two major ancient Phoenician cities located in modern-day Lebanon on the coast of the Mediterranean. The people there were known for their skill and dominance in shipbuilding, navigation, trade networks. The passage doesn't say how far Jesus and his disciples had traveled, but I assume that maybe a day's travel by foot. They were just starting to relax. It was an area of paganism and opposition to Jews and was known to be unfriendly territory to Jesus. And it's important to note that Jesus chose to go there knowing full well what it was like and who lived there. Now we're going to look at each of the three players, so to speak, in the story and see how each of them dealt with interruption. What was Jesus' interruption and how did he respond to it? He clearly was tired and wanted a break from the crowds and conflict. A parallel account in Mark 7:24 confirms that, and it says, "And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and did not want anyone to know." Have you ever felt that way? I confess I have. Yet he could not be hidden. In his humanness, it sounds like he was just exhausted, so went to Tyre and Sidon to withdraw and recover. No sooner than arriving in a home, this woman comes and begs him to deliver her troubled daughter. So he faced a genuine interruption. However, there is something else going on which we need to take into account as we unpack his response. In the preceding passage, he was sharply criticized by the Pharisees and teachers of the law because his disciples did not wash their hands before they ate. Christ's frustration seems to reach a crescendo as he said, "You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." His disciples came to him and said, "You know that you offended the Pharisees." To which he replied, "Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit." He was frustrated because the established religious leaders were only focused on outward purity and traditions while ignoring the inward condition of their hearts. Now he encounters this Gentile woman, and I believe, as do others who are more educated than myself, that he immediately and intentionally turns this into a teachable moment, redeeming the interruption into a kingdom interruption. At first he says nothing to her requests, essentially ignores her, or waits for things to play out more. Wasn't the first time. Remember when there was a woman caught in adultery and the religious leaders kept asking him what should happen to her? Remember how he kept silent, drawing in the ground? Then finally told them that whoever was without sin should throw the first stone. He used his silence to test them, and eventually they left, and the woman was spared. While he is silent, the disciples encourage him to send her away. We have read before that Jesus was able to know the thoughts of others, so he must have discerned what the woman and the disciples were thinking. He begins to draw it out, and the test begins. Then he tells her he was only sent to the lost sheep of House of Israel, not hers, since she is a Gentile. He is telling her what the old prophecies said. In Jeremiah 56, God calls Israel his people and his lost sheep. The Messiah spoken of throughout the Old Testament was seen as the one who would gather those lost sheep. So the Old Testament does confirm what he was saying. I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. He's speaking the truth of Scripture and using it in the same way that the Pharisees had used to condemn him just hours before. Clearly, Jesus as God knew about the prophecies given to Abraham that God would bless him and his descendants, and through them, ultimately, all nations would be blessed by faith, not by tradition or national identity. He knew that soon he would be sending his disciples to every tribe and tongue and nation, because his salvation to be bought on the cross was not limited to just Jewish people, but to all people. I think he discerned the disciples hadn't learned much from the previous confrontation with the Pharisees, so the test continued. Now she comes and kneels before him and says, "Lord, help me." We can only imagine her body language and tone. Now he tells her that it is not right to take the children's bread, referring to Israelites, and throw it to the dogs, a term sometimes used by the Jewish people in reference to non-Jewish people or Gentiles. Not very flattering. It seems harsh, but I believe he is again stating the distinction between what were God's chosen people and the Gentiles. In my mind, given what eventually happens, it is the final test, a final chapter of the test. He's probably saying what the disciples were thinking, and he is testing the woman's faith to the maximum. She says, "Yes, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Her response is masterful, still persisting, but with nuance and wisdom. At this point, Jesus commends her for her great faith and heals her daughter. I see Jesus turning this interruption into a powerful test, mainly for his disciples, but also for this dear woman. I am sure that the lessons learned from this were lifelong for the woman and her daughter. On another occasion, when he was also very tired and wanted a rest, he was met with crowds of people on the beach waiting for him to meet their needs. Rather than turn away or simply stay in the boat, the Bible says he had compassion on the crowds. And when his sleep was interrupted by the disciples' fear, he showed them his power and calmed the storm. When he was interrupted by lepers or widows or tax collectors, he did not dismiss them. Rather, he treated them with dignity, healed them, and usually taught kingdom truths to those who were observing. He was so intentional to turn every experience, every interruption into something to extend his teaching about the kingdom, the reign of God on earth. Jesus is certainly my example of how interruptions can become kingdom interruptions. What was the woman's interruption, and how did she respond to it? The woman, unnamed, is simply called the Syrophoenician woman, since Tyre and Sidon were ancient Phoenician cities, or the Canaanite woman, an ancient Semitic people who inhabited the Levant, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and parts of Syria. The Canaanites were polytheistic, with a pantheon of gods and goddesses, including Baal, Asherah, El, Astarte. They are mentioned a lot in the Old Testament as the Israelites moved out of Egypt to inhabit the Promised Land and sought to avoid adopting foreign gods. This dear mother had a significant life-altering interruption. Her daughter was severely oppressed by a demon. Many in North America, I don't know what you say, skeptical of possession, oppression, but my experiences in Africa and here have shown me how terrible this can be for the affected person and the whole family. A few lessons from the woman. She could have despaired and given up or abandoned her child. However, she learned somehow about Jesus and his ministry and found a way to meet him. When you're facing challenging interruptions, are you tempted to complain, cry, withdraw, become depressed, or give up? Do you begin to neglect searching the scriptures and asking Jesus for his strength? I was at a meeting on Thursday where various pastors met with Africa Inland Mission representatives. One of the speakers mentioned that some of the steps on the way to his burnout involved withdrawing, not reading the Bible, blaming others, feeling sorry for himself. As someone who gets a lot of interruptions every day, I confess that I have to battle against these tendencies. The example of this Canaanite woman is instructive to me. 2, she could have limited herself to her culture. And in her culture, children were often sacrificed to the gods. Although she was not a Jew, she still claimed the healing power of Jesus. She did not disqualify herself based on her background, but persisted in faith. That's an important lesson. When we have prayed and prayed and prayed to be released from a major life interruptions, it's sometimes easy to think that our prayers will never be answered. I can relate to that as well. There are applications right here in this room. Not everyone here embraces the same beliefs about God. This Canaanite woman obviously was willing to learn about Jesus and go against her cultural upbringing to put her trust in him. And we have seen many in here do the same, because God has shown himself that he is real. And so they have changed directions and sought after him. 3, and I think this is really important, she did not become offended or deterred by the initial silence and subsequent words of Jesus and the disciples, but remained steadfast and humble in addressing him reverently, at least 3 times. When she was told she did not qualify for Jesus' attention and power, she humbly persisted in her requests. If Jesus was testing her, then she passed the test with flying colors. And finally, we are told that she had great faith and obviously loved her daughter very much. Just as an aside, sometimes Christianity receives a bad reputation because of some domineering men who justify abusive treatment using an out-of-context biblical verse. I find it interesting that Jesus often highlights the faith and godly character of women. This woman from a non-Jewish background demonstrates a more faith-filled kingdom response to her life-altering interruption than the very disciples of Jesus at that time. How did the disciples respond? Don't have to say too much. Short section. They responded to the woman interrupting their time together with Jesus with impatience and asked Jesus to send her away. Really, it was rather a minor interruption for them. They must have understood the woman's need, but did not respond with empathy and concern. They rejected her, maybe out of a sense of ethnic superiority or annoyance, or because they also were tired and she was threatening to take away control of their plans. They failed the test. They did not respond to the interruption with the kingdom in mind. Be nice if I could leave it there, but before I'm too hard on them, I admit that I often fail that test. I certainly failed on many occasions with my children. I would say less often with my grandkids, but I guess you can ask them. I was too concerned with other things and missed the kingdom opportunity of their interruption. It was an imposition rather than an opportunity. The disciples, like I, missed the vital truth. It doesn't mean that we just surrender all our time to the whims of others, but in our hearts, interruptions shouldn't be viewed as getting in the way of real life. They are real life. for the Christian. Because God in his sovereignty allows people to come into our paths that we might have a kingdom response to them. This coming Saturday, there's going to be a lot of people coming, and they're going to interrupt what you're doing. They're going to ask you things. They're going to ask me things. And I wouldn't say, although I have a lot of white privilege, I know I do, but I wouldn't say I have an ethnic superiority, but it's easy to judge people by what they look like. I was reminded as I was downtown East Side this last week, and you see the brokenness. And if you're not careful, you can say, I don't have time for this. But Jesus dealt with the disenfranchised. There may be people coming on Saturday, if you're here, that won't fit your mold, that may threaten you a little bit. Hold off. Learn something from today. God's in control. There's a chance for a kingdom response to this interruption. Take some time to read through the Gospels and see that Jesus' life was a series of interruptions, and in each one he responded in a kingdom way. Reflect on the responses of the Canaanite woman when faced with a crisis with her daughter. Be encouraged that the woman whose story I shared at the beginning has bravely made a new life in Canada for her mother and younger siblings and continues to seek to help others caught in similar situations as she was. And we are very proud to be able to try to assist her in that, to bring a brother-in-law out of that context, a sister and children out of that oppression. I've often gone by the motto that if you can't get water in 20 minutes, you need to stop boring. But I am a little early, and I think I have time to read this one more passage from Henry Nouwen that summarizes this so beautifully. Don't we often look at the many events in our lives as big or small interruptions, interrupting many of our plans, projects, and life schemes? Don't we feel an inner protest when a student interrupts our reading, bad weather our summer, illness our well-scheduled plans, the death of a dear friend our peaceful state of mind, a cruel war our ideas about the goodness of man, and the many harsh realities of life our good dreams about it? And doesn't this unending row of interruptions build in our hearts feelings of anger, frustration, and even revenge? So much so that at times we see the real possibilities that growing old can become synonymous with growing bitter. But what if our interruptions are in fact our opportunities? If they are challenges to an inner response by which growth takes place and through which we come to the fullness of being? What if the events of our history are molding us as a sculptor molds his clay? And if it is only in careful obedience to these molding hands that we can discover our real vocation and become mature people? What if all the unexpected interruptions are in fact the invitations to give up old-fashioned and outmoded styles of living and are opening up new unexplored areas of experience? And finally, what if our history does not prove to be a blind, impersonal sequence of events over which we have no control, but rather reveals to us a guiding hand pointing to a personal encounter in which all our hopes and aspirations will reach their fulfillment? Then our life would indeed be a different life, because then fate becomes opportunity, wounds a warning, and paralysis an invitation to search for deeper sources of vitality. Then we can look for hope in the middle of crying babies, burning hospitals, and desperate parents and children. Then we can cast off the temptation to despair and speak about the fertile tree while witnessing the dying of the seed. Then indeed we can break out of the prison of an anonymous series of events and listen to the God of history who speaks to us in the center of our solitude and respond to his ever new call for conversion. I like that. So I'm going to have a short prayer here, and then the worship team will come. Father, rather than letting setbacks and interruptions upset me, I want to use them as reminders that you are the sovereign God and I am your beloved follower. Help me to trust in your unfailing love, gladly subordinating my plans to your infinitely wise master plan. Thank you.